Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Jenn Drummond is the first woman to climb the world's 7 second summits, the second tallest mountains on every continent. But as her website states, don't let the idea of second tallest fool you. To most mountaineers, these peaks are much more challenging than the traditional 7 summits due to the grueling nature of the pursuit. The same high altitude ascents, but with less infrastructure and far fewer safety nets. Yet before tackling the first of her 7 ascents, Jenn had only ever climbed one mountain prior. So how did this all come about? Having achieved business success as the founder and CEO of a thriving financial services company and enjoying a wonderful family life as the mother of 7, life changed dramatically one snowy evening in 2018. A horrific car accident brought Jenn inches from death, the general consensus being it was an accident that she should not have survived. Yet somehow she did. In the aftermath, it became clear to her that while she cannot control when she leaves this life, she can, along with the rest of us, choose how she lives it. And boy, does she live it. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Jenn Drummond, welcome to Extrology. It's a pleasure to have you here as our guest today. Really looking forward to discussing a huge range of topics, frankly, but I wondered if I might start, first and foremost, with your upcoming book, Breakproof, 7 Strategies to Build Resilience and Achieve Your Life Goals. What inspired you to write it?
Yes, so I wrote the book because I quit on myself years ago. And I woke up to a car accident that reinvigorated my soul and decided to wake me up to this gift of life. And I don't want anybody else to quit on their life like I did on mine. If I look back over the last 5 years of everything that's happened, it's been nothing shy of magical. And if I didn't wake up and stop quitting on my dreams or my pursuits, that wouldn't have happened. And so I have to imagine that everybody out there that's listening, there's things in you that you've put on the back burner or have quit on for right now. And I want this book to inspire you to step into those things again, because everybody benefits when you do.
When you say, I think I'm be careful I don't put words in your mouth, but what you quit on you, I think was the phrase that you quit on
Yes.
What does that mean? Perhaps for the benefit of listeners, I suspect that's a uniquely personal insight you're about to offer. But when you say quit on you, how did that manifest? How did that materialize for you?
Yeah, so I owned a business and hired myself out of a job so that I could be a stay-at-home mom. And for a while, I needed to be a stay-at-home mom. There's a ton of needs for all the kids. I have 7, right? So there's definitely lots going on.
That's a ton of needs, right?
That's a ton of needs, yes. But then they all got into school. And then I had all this day to fill with time, but I kept just filling it with their activities and their needs and their things going on that maybe wasn't the best use of my time or the best way that I felt fulfilled. But I kept telling myself, you know what? They're going to go to college. And once they go to college, I'm going to start doing what gets me excited again. But right now I'm in the season of motherhood, and that's just going to be all consuming. So I was doing it. I wasn't really thriving at it. It wasn't my place. I felt a little guilty because I know a lot of people that want to be stay-at-home moms, and that's not an option for them. It was an option for me, but I wanted to do things that I just didn't let myself do because I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to be room mom in every room. I'm going to teach all the soccer teams. I'm going to do all these things. And when you start giving all of yourself and don't save any of yourself for your own pursuits or your own desires, like life starts to just become box checking and doing and not really living this inspired life that I wanted to live.
Were you aware of that at the time? Or is it with the benefit of hindsight, you reflect there's been a series of, there's been a life-changing event that was very impactful, I know, and we'll come on to that. But as you were living through that existence, did you feel that? Did you sense it?
I don't know if I knew how to get out of it, right? Like I didn't know how to give myself permission and not feel like, oh, I should be doing something else, or I should be, my kids are only young for so long and I need to be there for all these moments and not miss any of them and da-da-da-da-da. And so I just was Like, this is my sentencing. I had 7 children. And so this is what it looks like. And this is what we should do. And this is the thing. I didn't really know how to carve time out for myself and feel okay about that by maybe not being at every single moment, maybe not catching every single thing, but still being a good mom. And actually, now that I can look back on it hindsight, I'm a better mom because I'm so excited about life. I'm doing these big, crazy things. My kids are watching me and they're seeing what it's like to balance a family, balance your own needs, run a business, and live from a place of, hey, I'm full. Now I can fill you up as well, instead of always doing everybody else and me being the one that I was sacrificing. And I thought about it. I don't want my life before, I didn't want that on any of my kids. And so when I started thinking like that, like, hey, what do I want my kids' life to look like? Then that's what maybe my life should look like so that I can demonstrate it to them. And then things changed for all of us.
So what was the catalyst for that change?
Oh, the car wreck, for sure. So I was driving home on the highway and the side, like a reservoir on the side of the water, caught my attention. Luckily, my attention got pulled back to the road, but I was coming up very fast into a semi truck that was pulling a trailer. And I went to get into the lane to move around him. He started bumping into the lane too because there was something on the side of the road. And my passenger side hit his back trailer corner. And I went end over end over end, and then started doing some sideways turns and eventually ended up stopping in the median upside down. Went to the hospital. Luckily, I checked out okay. The police called me a few weeks later, said, hey, we've rebuilt this accident for safety purposes. We can't build a scenario where you live, let alone a scenario where you walked away. So buy that car for the rest of your life because we have no clue why you're still here.
Literally walked away. So were you able to get out of the vehicle?
Well, they had to peel back the windshield and everything was crunched. Goodness. And then they had I had to wait till the ambulance came because they didn't know if adrenaline was masking something or if I moved my spine, would something be wrong, right? So I had to wait till rescue workers got there and I got to the hospital. We ran all the tests and I was fine. I did go home. And about 3 weeks later, I did have to go into the hospital a couple times because I kept spiking a fever. We couldn't figure out where the fever was because it was 105 or 104. It was a high fever. And we finally realized that the seatbelt had cut my breast implant from the pressure. And so we can joke about it now. The accident gave me a new lease on life, a new car, and new boobs. What more can a girl want?
What a way of looking at it, right? But
Yes.
but an absolutely pivotal moment in your life.
Very pivotal because also that happens. And then the police call and say, we don't know how you're here. And then a few weeks after that, a girlfriend of mine is running on a trail that you and I could push a stroller down. And it's wet out. She slips. She hits her head, never comes home. So I'm sitting there thinking, I survived this thing that there's no way they could even figure out how. She does something that's healthy and doesn't get to come home. And it was in that moment that I realized I don't get to choose when I die, but I sure get to choose how I live. And if I would have died a couple weeks ago, there are so many things I wish I would have done with my life. I wish I would have swam in the ocean more, visited more countries, tried more foods, it really pivoted me from, I don't care what you guys think anymore. At the end of the day, I'm going to die on my own terms. You have no control over that. So you can have your opinions. That's fine. Now I'm more concerned. What happens if this is my last decade or year or month or week or day? There's things I want to do before I leave this place.
Isn't it true that it should take something quite so dramatic to change a perspective and an outlook and ultimately a way of life? And I suspect that's true of so many people who've experienced life-changing events, traumatic events, whatever they might be, but it should take something of that magnitude before a change takes place.
I wish it didn't have to be that way, right? I feel like the universe is probably nudging me a little bit, little whispers here and there, but I wasn't listening. And so I needed the car wreck to wake up, to say, listen, Jen, this is it.
So where do you start? So you're in this, you've been through this incredibly traumatic, literally life-changing event, the awful passing of your friend to which you refer, for which I'm very sorry.
Mm-hmm.
What happens next? Where do you go from there? Because was it literally a moment of going right now? That click of the fingers. Today we change, and this is how. What was the journey from there on?
So the beginning, like the first year, so 2019 was a year of awe, reflection, bucket list building. Like I'm pretty sure I'm gonna need 4 lives to get all these things done.
Had you a bucket list prior? Had you a kind of even a notion of one before?
Yeah, I would say like I was a financial advisor, right? So you knew, okay, we broke up lives into decades and then we planned for expenses during certain decades. And I was a planner. So I knew bucket lists, but I wasn't, again, like my bucket list at the time was let's get the kids launched. I'm going to have endless time once they're gone. And then I'll start doing these things, which is silly. Like we do that a lot, I think, to ourselves. If that happens, then this can happen. If this happens, then that can happen. Like now, if you can do it now, then you can do it then, right? Like figure it out. So 2019 was a huge year of reflection. What do I want to do? What does my life mean? What kind of significance do I want to have in this world? And 2020, my 40th birthday was coming up. So for my 40th birthday, I said, I'm going to climb a mountain. I'm going to climb a mountain to say, like, this is launching my 40th decade, and this is what this decade's going to signify, and da-da-da-da-da. So I asked friends that were into mountaineering, like, hey, if you could climb one mountain in the whole world, what mountain would you climb? And they said, in general consensus, there's a mountain in Nepal named Ama Dablam. I hadn't heard of it before, but I looked it up. It's the Paramount Pictures logo. It means the mother's necklace. It is a gorgeous, stunningly beautiful mountain in Nepal. So I'm like, okay, I'll climb that. That's perfect. And so I was training for that mountain and COVID hit, right? So now all of us are stay-at-home teachers because you have 7 kids that need to be homeschooled because they're not in school anymore. And one of my sons was struggling with his math homework. I'm like, listen, buddy, we do hard things, in like the proverbial pep talk piece. And he looks at me and he goes, if we do hard things, why are you climbing a mountain called I'm a Dumb Blonde instead of a real mountain like Mount Everest?
I'm a dumb blonde. What's it?
Yeah,
Remind me of the name of that mountain again.
Yeah, so it's Ama Dablam, not I'm a Dumb Blonde. It was like, what?
From the mouths of babes, as the phrase would go, right?
Yes, 100% my story. So then I'm like, finish your homework. So he finished his homework, and then we looked at Everest, and he went to bed, and I thought about it more. I was like, you know what? I do only get to live once. Like, why not climb Everest? If Everest is the biggest, best mountain in his eyes, I'm going to climb it and show him that whatever our Everest is, we've got this. Like, you can do it. And so by the end of the week, I had a coach called and hired, and I was climbing Ama Dablam and Everest. And this coach gave me a book. And the book was to become an uphill athlete. Because I had climbed one mountain before. It was in Jackson.
Had you any previous climbing experience?
This one mountain, yes, in Jackson Hole called the Grand Teton. And I loved it. I mean, it was a great experience, which is why climbing a mountain was on my bucket list after the car accident.
Right.
And so I'm reading this book, and in the front of it, there was a lady who got a Guinness World Record for doing something in the Alps. And I was on the phone with my coach, and I'm like, I could have done that. Like, I can suffer. I have 7 children. I've been homeschooling this entire year. I can suffer. And my kids would think I'm cool. They learned how to read on Guinness World Record books. Like, this would be awesome. And he laughed, and I'm like, yeah. And he goes, I'll think of something. I'm like, okay, think of something, but I'm not growing pumpkins. I'm not speed eating hot dogs, like none of that kind of stuff. And I let the conversation go, just kind of like, whatever. It was kind of half joking. And then he called me back a few weeks later, and he's like, Jen, I've got the perfect world record for you. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah. Listen. I'm like, okay. He's like, I think you should climb the 7-second summits. What are they? Like, I don't know. What are the 7-second summits? I've never even heard of this before. He's like, yeah. He goes, listen, it's the second highest point on each continent. They're harder than the first 7. They've only been done by one male. You would be the first woman to do it. And think about it, 7 continents, 7 mountains, 7 children. It sounds like a jackpot. And I was thinking back, I'm like, you know what? I want to have impact. I want to be like, explore the world. I want to do things that challenge me. Like, this is it. I'm going to do it. So I said yes. I'd never slept in a tent overnight on snow before, but hey, I was going to figure it out.
So the question that springs to mind is where you go from there. So you sit down and you go, right, I'm going to do this. You mentioned you were a planner. The thing that strikes me is that there's a huge logistics operation that sits around this. I'd imagine I've never done it. There's also the physical preparation. So the fitness that's required, the type of fitness that's required to achieve this. I'd imagine I've done some bouldering. I mean, I'm talking like on an afternoon for an hour, right? So I'd imagine there's a technique and a series of techniques that you need to learn, which are not straightforward and need to be mastered. You can't kind of just, it's a dangerous place, right? So how do you go from talking to your coach on the phone to all of a sudden you're on the side of a mountain?
Yeah, one step at a time. So we looked at what each mountain required. And then we did an assessment of where I was. And then we figured out what the strategy was to fill in the gaps for the skills that I didn't have. So I was training for Ama de Blanc already. Ama is much more technical than Everest. Everest is just higher. And you don't know how you're going to do on Everest until you go to Everest. Some people are good at altitude. Some people's bodies do not function at altitude. I am lucky and I have Sherpa lungs, they tease. I do very well at altitude. It doesn't affect me as much as it affects others. And that's genetics, probably more than anything, to be honest. You can do some training, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I did the easy mountains first to build momentum and things like that.
Respectfully, I don't mean to interrupt. Let me just back that up a little bit. So when you say easy mountains, you're talking about the 7-second summits, which as I understand it, are the 7 hardest mountains, or each one is the hardest mountain to climb technically on each one of the continents on which it sits.
No. So it's the second highest point on each continent.
But technically it's the hardest to, invariably they are harder to climb, or perceived, certainly from a mountaineer's perspective, as the more challenging technically than the ones that we might all know, which, Everest, Kilimanjaro, whatever it might be.
Yeah, right. So for example, like Kilimanjaro, there's been people that have modified wheelchairs to get up to the top of it. It's a hike for the most part.
I have 2 pals who've climbed Kilimanjaro. I mean, I can assure you, you'd barely think they could make it up the stairs, but they actually got to the top of Kilimanjaro. But it's an incredibly challenging, but ultimately demanding walk. So you're talking about climbing.
Mount Kenya, its second highest point in Africa, is a 20-pitch rock climb.
Yeah.
So you're in a harness and rock shoes and you're climbing and that kind of stuff. So that's the difference between the seconds and the first in some cases, right? Like it's a little bit different in each continent. But so my first mountain was Ojos del Salado in Chile, which is located in the Atacama Desert. And was a volcano. So volcanoes are, if you could shrink yourself to smaller than a grain of sand, it'd be like climbing an anthill. Okay, there's nothing pretty. There's nothing mountain. There's not like a mountain range. It's this like pimple that sticks out of the desert that you just like trek your little body up and hope that you can handle the altitude. So that was an easy one because I could see how I did at higher altitude levels. It didn't require a lot of technical skill. It required, sleeping in a tent, melting snow for water, eating out of like bags instead of real food. Like, how does your body do with that kind of energy and that kind of fuel and that kind of digestion stress? So I did fine. And then I went to do Mount Kenya next, which was the technical rock climb. It's like 17,000 feet, a little bit higher. So I wasn't worried about the altitude then. And I figured if I didn't summit Kenya, then I knew what I needed to work on to come back and summit it, because it's the only one that's a true rock climb for most of the climb. And I trained in Las Vegas, which is about 6 hours from where I live, on rocks that were very similar to what you find in Kenya. So I could mimic some of the moves and some of the stuff that was going to be happening based on reports that we could read of other climbers. And it worked out. Like, we got lucky. We summited. Everything was fine. Came back home, went to climb Everest. And then I realized, okay, I'm good at altitude. Everest is 800 feet higher than K2. Everest was my training ground for K2 because K2 is so steep and so much more dangerous than Everest. You don't want to You don't want to practice on K2. Like even when you go climb K2, a lot of times teams there will acclimatize on Broad Peak, which is a mountain next to K2, to just keep their time on K2 as little as possible.
So let's go back as you're on this journey. Can you remember, if you take us back to Chile, the morning of your first climb, how you felt? Do you remember those emotions, that the sensations, the feelings? How was it? How did you feel?
It was
how did you
horrible.
feel? Really?
Terrible.
Were you nervous?
I hated it. I wasn't nervous because it was my first one. So for me, it's like, if I mess up or if it doesn't work out, it doesn't matter. This is my first one. It's like a rough draft. I'm practicing. Like my mentality was very much curiosity. Right. What am I going to learn? What am I going to come back with? What am I going to do? It wasn't like, I have to summit this mountain the first time and blah, blah, blah. It was, I'm new at this. What am I going to learn about myself? What do I need to get better at? Well, how's my training working? What isn't working? Like, it was just a very curious spirit. But my climb on Ojos was, I did Ama de Blam first. So I did Ama de Blam in October. And then I'm like, okay, Ama was amazing. I loved it. It was challenging. I was scared. I was all the things, but it was all of the things that are good and bad. So when I went to Ojos, I was expecting something similar to Ama, and they're totally opposite.
Right.
Like Ojos is like you take a step up and you slide half a step back because of the landscape. So it takes forever to get up the mountain because you keep sliding down for every foot you gain. And it's so windy. So it's in the Atacama Desert. There's nothing that holds heat in. So when the sun starts to come up, it starts baking the air, which then causes the air like a convection oven to move. So the entire time you're climbing, it's like this sound of, and it is mind numbing because it is 12 to 14 hours a day that you hear that sound, and there's no way to get rid of it because it's not consistent. And it's cold. I didn't expect it to be cold. I hear the word desert and I'm thinking like I'm sweating. You're not sweating at Ojos del Salado, like at all. Never did I sweat. I wish I was sweating at sometimes because then I could just feel warmth. That was not my case. In fact, when I was climbing up the mountain, I was climbing with a friend of mine, Ted, and thank God for Ted because I was freezing. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to turn around because I'm cold. And he gave me his gloves, and that was like the difference between able to continue or not because I was afraid I was going to be frostbitten.
There's so much to take away from this. I'm in awe, first and foremost. What do you learn about yourself as a consequence? Each one of these mountains, you're doing more than ticking them off, but each step of the way, it's another achievement. What are you learning about yourself on this journey?
How important it is to control what's between your ears to getting anything done. Your story that you're telling on repeat or in any circumstance, it's either elevating you to rise to the occasion or it's preventing you from being able to move forward. And every time you're in a spot where it's overwhelming, you have a choice to change that thought, to empower yourself, or you can continue down a path that's going to make it harder to move forward.
And I'd imagine that gets pretty keenly tested, whether it's with the conditions in which you're finding yourself, right? Those doubt must come into play. The kind of
definitely. I mean,
that little adversary in the mind is just saying, "Come on, take the easy route. You're going to get frostbitten. Just step down, take your foot off the gas, go and find a nice hot shower somewhere." All these.
When you allow it. Like, so here's an example. I was on Mount Logan, which is in Canada. And that's the second highest point for North America. And we were in a horrific snowstorm, but I was wearing pink goggles because when you wear pink goggles, it's good for low light. And there wasn't a lot of light because the sun was hidden behind the snow clouds. And so I'm wearing these pink goggles and I'm thinking I'm in a cotton candy machine. Like, look at all this cotton candy flowing around. Like, I can almost taste it in my mouth. The rope that I was tied to with the pink lenses looked like a watermelon rind. And so my kids sing that song, like Watermelon Sugar High. So I'm like thinking of cotton candy, Candyland, Watermelon Sugar High. I'm kind of dancing along the way. And then our alarms go off to tell us it's time to eat. Because when you're at altitude, you can sometimes forget to eat. Your body doesn't give you the same signals. And so I bump my goggles to be able to get my snack out. And all of a sudden I'm like, what is going on? Like, when did we get into this storm? Like, what, are we safe? Or should we be doing this? And everybody on the team looked at me like I had been smoking a joint. Jenn, where have you been? This has been like this for the last 2 hours. Are you kidding? Like, pretending that you just noticed? I'm like, you don't understand. I was in La La Land. Like, it was that experience that was like, holy cow, if you're going to commit to get from point A to B and it sucks, freaking grab some pink lenses, because it changes your story and your energy changes. Like, when all of a sudden I realized I was in this horrific snowstorm, like all the energy zapped out of me and nothing changed but my thought. Nothing changed.
Had you if you reflect back on your life, had you kind of a pattern of subconsciously being able to change your state, if you like, change your message, reframe whatever circumstances in which you found yourself? Had that been something that was naturally who you are, or had you done any studying around it? Had you learned about it? How had that sort of come about?
I mean, I think it's something we train ourselves to do. I could definitely recall back to when I graduated from college. I took a job in the financial service industry and I was all excited, right? Like, I left college a year early to take this job. And I told my parents were like, fine, if you're going to go, you're young, you have to stay at this company for a year, no matter what. I'm like, of course I will. What are you talking about? I go to my college people. Yes, you can graduate. Here's what you need to do. You'll graduate a year early. So I graduated a year early. I show up to this job and I'm like, hi, I'm Jenn. I'm the new financial advisor. They're like, hey, Jenn, there's a table and a phone book. Go have fun. I'm like, oh, no, I'm the financial advisor. That's a call center person. That's not me. And she's like, oh, no, honey, it is. You're both. Like, you have to build your book of business. And I was like, what? No one told, like, what? This is not, no. I'm going to, like, for the first 3 weeks of my job, I went home every day sobbing. I'm like, I've never heard no so many times in my life. What is this? Like, who does this? And I was afraid of my parents. So I wasn't going to quit. Like, I couldn't call my dad. He would kill me. My kids would be like, whatever, we could call mom with anything. She will, like, what? I had fear that my children do not have. I even called my college. Hey, do you think I could get back in? I was like, kidding. I don't want to graduate. And they're like, honey, you'd have to re-register and do everything. Like, you have your diploma. I'm like, okay, well, I'm here. Like, this is my thing. So I'm going to be here for the next 52 weeks. I put it on my calendar when I was allowed to quit. Like, I literally circled the day and wrote freedom on that day. And I realized I could have 52 weeks of a sobbing nightmare, or I can figure out how to make the best of the situation, because I already committed to the commitment. And I think that's a huge thing. And I write about it in my book. Once you commit to the commitment, you no longer spend energy trying to get out of it. Now you're finding energy, like, how do you make it better? How does it become more fun? How do you succeed with these limitations? And I bought a pop gun that used to have like this foam ball, and you'd shoot it and the ball would bounce and it'd come back because it was attached by a rubber band. And when someone would hang up on me, I'd shoot them. I'd be like, okay, I got the last thing. Like, I mean, it was like dumb, but that's what worked. And so you have those experiences. And then anytime something got bad, I'm like, okay, this is the game. These are the rules. I can't leave, or I can't do whatever. How do I make this circumstance fun? And that's been a huge game changer in everything I've been able to achieve, because go against somebody who's having fun. It's a lot harder than somebody who's like gritting and grinding to get it done.
That's a great story. I love the idea of the pop gun. That's I had a background in cold calling sales at a similar age, and you learn, your skin toughens fast, right, in that environment. Yes. It has to, but it's a long way. The metaphors align, but it's a long way from climbing a mountain, right? It's a long way. So, was there one particular challenge or incident or event on one of those mountainsides that really stood out for you as perhaps the toughest moment? And if so, how did you overcome it?
I have two that stand out in my head and the most. I lost a teammate, Rick Allen, on K2. So there was an avalanche. He was caught in it, didn't survive. Another teammate got injured in the same avalanche, and another one was stuck on the mountain for a few hours. And it was one of those things where you read about things, right? Like you know they're a risk, you hear about them or whatever. But when somebody on your team is in one, it's just next level of closeness. Like, how did this happen? He was a seasoned mountaineer. Like, is this really a risk? Like, all the questions start showing up. And at the end of the day, we don't have answers to a lot of those questions. But if I come back to my guiding principle of I don't get to choose when I die, but I sure get to choose how I live, like I need to stay in that space. And if I look at Rick's death, which was horribly sad, he was 68. He was single. He was married to the mountains. His life was around mountaineering. If you like just step back for a second and think, if I'm 68 years old and I'm climbing one of the most deadly mountains in the world and I die, like maybe that's not the worst way to go.
It's doing something he loved, right? To your point, he's wedded to the mountains.
Right. I mean, that was his love. So I do think it was premature. I'm sad that he's not still here.
For sure.
And it would have been wonderful if it happened when he was like 98, but we don't get to choose that.
No.
But we do get to choose doing what we love. And he was doing what he loved. And okay, like I'm going to sit with that and allow that to be the story so that I can continue to write mine.
Do you, and arguably I would suggest a wonderful tribute to his life, that he died doing something that he loved, awful though that is for those that would have loved him. But do you recall, what fascinates me is, so you're summiting, you reach the summit. Is there a kind of moment of euphoria? How do you celebrate that? How do you celebrate that? Or is there that sense of, this is only half the job, right? I've now got to get back down. So what's the experience when you summit?
So I allow myself to have that experience of awe. So when I get to the top of the mountain, you take in this huge breath and everything dissipates. There's no space, there's no time, there's no separation, there's nothing. It's just you're one with the mountain, with the sun, with the sky, with the wind, with all of it. And it feels like there's nothing like it. Like you feel for it, you fiend for it. You know this feeling, you can feel it in your being. And then you exhale and you bring in a few more breaths and exhale. And eventually like everything comes back to normal. And I'm Jen and this is the mountain and that's the sun. And we're all these separate things. And then it's like, okay, it's time to get home because I'm not safe until I'm home. But you could skip through that space. For sure, we skip through that space in everyday life. We have that euphoria feeling available to us whenever we want to get really present and just stop with all the noise. I feel like meditators can get there, and I feel yogis can get into the flow and forget they're even doing the movements. It just becomes the meditation. So it's an amazing feeling, and it's humbling to know that as humans, we have the ability to connect to that.
And I can see, for the benefit of listeners, I have the beauty of seeing the reaction on your face when you describe it. You can see it strikes me, and you'll suggest if I'm not truthful in what I say, but that it's wired in, right? It strikes me that this is very much. I can see the energy that comes from you when you're reflecting back on that moment that you're at the top of the world. How do you then rewire yourself for what's ahead? Because the tough bit. It's as tough, I'd imagine, coming down as it is going up.
It is. It's harder coming down, actually, because when you're going up a mountain, you put your foot and then you weight it. You put your foot, then you weigh it, right? Like you can test it. Like, oh, if it starts slipping, I'm going to move my foot to another spot. When you're going down the mountain, your weight is on every step. So every step counts. You're tired. What the benefit is that you're getting more oxygen the lower you go. So that does help you. But yeah, most accidents and most deaths happen on the way down. Right. That's just stats. So then when you know that, you're also more conscientious of that and being more precise with what you're doing, for sure. But yeah.
It's an incredible metaphor for life, and so much. I don't want to give, strategies to build resilience and achieve your life goals, as the book title, 7 strategies. I feel like I'm at risk of giving much of them away just by sharing these experiences. There's so many, right?
But there's so many stories. And what I did is I just took all these stories from the mountains, and then we said, okay, here's the general message, and here's the general message, and here's the general message. And then it gives the reader questions to ask and things to think about so they can apply these to their lives, because we're all climbing mountains. Just most of us are metaphorical, right? And so,
as a metaphor for life, I don't think there are many better.
Exactly. And so you're sitting there thinking, okay, well, here's the physical thing, and you get this story and you get to feel it at some level that maybe you wouldn't understand if you didn't read, which is a fun place to be. And then you come back to your life, you're like, oh, I know that. Okay, I get how that can help me. One of the principles is big mountains take big teams. If you have a big goal, you're going to need a big team to make that goal happen. If you want to achieve small in life, then sure, by one person, go ahead, do your thing. But to do big things, that takes a lot of people. So you need to be good at communicating and empowering and inspiring. And you need to know, here's what I am. And then the people around you are like, yeah, we want to be a part of that. Let's lift you up and make it happen.
I think the other thing that strikes me is that coming on to, the fact that it is 7 mountains in your case is also a great metaphor for life, because it isn't, we are all climbing mountains, to your point, but it's never just one. And it's, that you get to the point at which you think, right, I've peaked, I've reached the summit, fabulous. There's that euphoric moment, you breathe it in, and you got to get back down again and get ready to get back up the next one. And that is life, right? That is life.
Yeah, you want to get up the other, there's some proverb out there, and I think it's a Haitian proverb that says, there's a mountain after a mountain. There's always more mountains, right? We'll have mountains our whole life. And the idea is, I was on Everest. We were on the top of Everest for 10 minutes. Now, I come from a very healthy background. So it took me a year to train for Everest. I was on the side of the mountain for 3 weeks. We got to the top and came down. If I did all of that for the 10 minutes on top of the mountain, I missed the whole purpose of having that be my mountain, because it's not the summit. It's all the things that you overcame, or you learned about, or you experienced, or you became, or you saw oh, here's where my edge is. How do I make that edge further out? Here's who I am in this environment. I'm proud of how I showed up. Here's areas that I need to get better at, because I want to be a different human than the human that I was that showed up that way. And so this goal of this mountain gave us the direction to become the people that we get to become on the journey. And we celebrate the summit because the summit is the summation of all the things we overcame. Otherwise, if we just wanted summits, we get on a helicopter, fly to a whole bunch of them, take photos, and do the next one. No one does that. They don't do that because they want the climb.
Miley Cyrus was right, okay? It is the climb. she got it right.
Listen to Miley.
but it's true. I think you. The thing that also I'm interested to understand from your experience is that, so you mountain number 7, you're down, right? So you've gotten to the bottom. Was there a sense of, well, what now? Was there a what next moment? If only because, and if I share a story with you, I always remember an old neighbor of mine, actually, who was a self-made guy, really successful. But he told me a great story that when he was a kid, cars were his thing. He loved cars. He was a car nut, still is. And he loved Ferraris. And all he ever wanted to do was drive a Ferrari. And he left school with very little by way of qualification to his name, dragged himself up by the bootstraps. By the time he was 23, 24, he bought his first Ferrari. Cash, paid for. Drove it off the forecourt, drove 2 miles down the road, pulled over pulled to the side of the road and burst into tears because he had nothing else. There was nothing beyond the Ferrari. He literally remembers, he told the story vividly. He said, I remember in that lay-by crying, thinking this is ridiculous. There are far tougher things in life, but I'm 23, 24. I've got nothing else to aim for. What do I do now? What do I do for the next 60 years or however long it might be? So I think that sense of constantly reevaluating, readjusting, repurposing, understanding what the horizon, it's always on the horizon. Where am I headed? Did you have that? Were you prepared for that? Was that your your experience?
I knew it was coming, but I didn't plan for it. Like the nice thing about climbing the 7-second summits, when you had one, you still had another one ahead of you, right? So you're like, okay, this one's important, but I still have another one, so no big deal. And I was very conscientious about, I am not committing to anything after this quest, because I have a tendency to fill my life and go, 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 go. And I'm like, I need to practice the pause. I need to allow myself to feel this thing, understand the impact it made, and understand what I want to do next, and not just say yes to something because it showed up. I want to be much more intentional about what the next thing is that I do. This thing took 2.5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I do not regret it at all. I think it was an amazing journey. I'm beyond grateful that the universe used me to bring this story to the world. I mean, it is definitely a higher power. I'm just the body that got to embody the story. But I mean, it came out of a bet that got to like climb Everest, to do this, to do that. It wasn't super intentional, still magical. Now I'm like, I want to do something very intentional this next time and see what shows up that way. That's just the experience that I want. So I was sad when it was done, because it was my compass. It was my North Star. It was like, I know what I'm doing. I know if I'm getting closer. I know if I'm getting further away. That's the benefit of goal setting. It allows you to say, like, are my decisions getting me closer or farther? And it just gives you a line to like work towards. So right now it's like, okay, I'm going to write the book. I'm going to let the book do what it's supposed to do. I'm going to take my boys on a climbing trip in February, and do a climbing thing with them. And then I'm going to be, okay, it's kind of like my year after the car accident. Like 2019 was a year of reevaluating. This next year is just a year of allowing a whole bunch of opportunities to show up like they are. I'm doing speaking engagements and some coaching stuff, like fun. But then I'm going to be intentional again about what the next phase is. I just wanted a year to sort through that.
Do you think, I love that. I love the emphasis on reflection that you've alluded to post the car accident, and the opportunity to just pause. I'm doing it here. So without even really thinking about it, I'm focusing all my attention, all my questions on climbing the mountains, right? The doing. So we place so much stock, broad sweeping statement, but nonetheless, we place, from a societal perspective, particularly in the West, so much emphasis on what are you doing? What do you do? So once upon a time, we'd place great virtue and great value in the philosophers and the thinkers. You know, if you were sat doing nothing, right, you would be thought, we want to watch that one. He's a clever guy or a clever woman, because they're thinking, right? There's virtue in that. And all of a sudden we seem to have lost that. And it's like, no, what are you doing? And we place the value and the emphasis on the doing, and not enough time to reflection. We live such busy lives. So I think the fact that I think there's a lot to be taken from that. I think inevitably people will focus on the incredible achievement that you've, the first female world record holder to conquer the second highest peaks on every continent. I mean, it's just phenomenal. People will focus on that, and rightly so. It's a wonderful achievement. But I think there's an awful lot they can take from the reflective nature on which you've gone about things. I think there's real value in the thinking. What does this all mean? What have I learned? Where's this taking me? All I think that's a really important message.
And we teach the pause by practicing the pause. Like my son is in high school, and everybody keeps asking him, where are you going to go to college? What are you going to do? Whatever. And his friends were over the other day, and I asked one of his friends, I'm like, what do you like best about your life right now? And his friend was like, you know what? You're the first mom that's not asking me where I'm going to college. And I'm like, you know what? You need to know like where you are right now. Like, what do you like best about your life right now? So that you can be reflective of that and be like, how do I get more of that in my life and my future versus where am I going? What am I doing? Right. And you have to teach that by asking the right questions so that they know to even think about that.
It's a great question. That's a really, really powerful question. And I think to be able to share that, a young adult, to give them the gift of being able to understand that and reflect on that and have that time to practice the pause. That's a wonderful phrase. Tell me a bit about that. How do you practice the pause? Because I think many of us would benefit from that knowledge.
Yeah. It's allowing. So I'll use this example because I think all of us can use it wherever we are in our lives. I have a stoplight by my house.
Right.
Because I'm on the short side. Right. So I get the red light all the time. I used to get so grumpy at this red light. I'm like, oh my God, I got the red light. And I'm like, the red light doesn't care that I have the red light. Only I care that I have the red light. And then finally I realized, you know what? This red light is going to be our gratitude light. So whenever we hit it, everybody in the car automatically knows we have to say something that we're grateful for. And maybe we get to say more than one thing we're grateful for because the red light's long or whatever that is. And it changed our way of dealing with that red light. Where before we'd be like grumpy or like thinking of all the things we needed to do or whatever. It taught us to pause and say, oh, what am I grateful for in this moment? Instead of why am I angry that I hit this red light? And we have these things in our life all the time. I call them trigger meditations. What can you do in your life that triggers a pause? Maybe it's every single time you open the door to go outside of the house. If you put your hand on that door, can you pause, say I'm grateful for something, or just allow a couple breaths in without any thought and then go on your day? It's those teeny tiny things that take less than a minute that have immeasurable impact over our entire day. So
when did the idea for the book come? Where did the book come from? What was the story behind it? Was there a moment you're on a mountain decided, I know, I'm gonna write this into a book. This is great. Was there a moment behind that?
I still hate my friend that convinced me to do this. So I have a friend that's an author. Watch who you hang out with. They give you ideas that you're like, wait. And he's like, listen, your stories are so awesome. Like, you have to share these. These are so beneficial. And so write a book. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, writing a book's easy. I would rather climb all those mountains again than write this book again, if I had to be honest with you. It's so much work because when you're writing a story, are you giving too much detail so then the reader gets bored? Are you giving not enough detail so then they don't follow along? Is the lesson that they're reading something that they can interpret and get a benefit from? And so then they know how to apply this principle to their life. And so there's so many lenses that you're always trying to tell the story from, because the most important asset we have is time. So I want to be super respectful for anybody's time that invests in this book to make sure that they're getting 10x, 20x, 100x of what they put in out.
So I love the idea of Seek Your Summit. I think it's a fabulous idea. It's intriguing. Could you explain what it means to you and how it can help individuals unleash their inner power?
Yeah. So I feel like when you use the word seek, that's like hide and seek, like be playful, like be curious. It's not conquer your summit. It's not achieve it's seek. Like, does this feel right? Does this feel wrong? Do I want to take another step forward? Do I want to pivot another direction? And then your summit is like something that's pulling you forward. Whatever that is, like what has your attention? What has you curious? What gets you excited? My mom gets excited about bookshelves. I look at a bookshelf and I have no excitement whatsoever. I look at a mountain and I can't wait to climb it. She looks at it and thinks it belongs in a photo, right? Like, we're just different people and that's perfect. And so figure out who you are. That's what I think this life's about, is learning what it feels like to be us in these different circumstances.
The thought that springs to my mind is there's almost like, as I reflect on the thought, it sounds almost disparaging, and please, no offense, it's not meant to be, but it's almost a childlike quality to how you go about, if you look back to your pink goggles and, on the mountainside and the cotton candy and the water and the melon and then singing, there's almost like there's an element of play. And it brings me back to really interesting guy. I just had a guest, a chap called Daryl Edwards, who is a survivor from, we had some terrorist incidents not long after 9/11 in the UK, some bombings in London. Daryl's survivor, traumatic series of events post that. He's now very actively involved in what he determines as primal play, which is using this concept of play to tackle challenges around obesity and movement. He's the movement coach. Wonderful guy. But he said to me, when was the last time you played, Lee, like you did when you were a kid? When's the last time you climbed a tree and didn't worry about falling out? When was the last time you just, instead of running after the bus, you decided to run to beat the bus? Like, did you ever do that? I'm like, no, we don't do that as adults. When does all that stuff start? There's a wonderful childlike playfulness to
Oh, there
how you're
is.
conquering these events. I think there's a lot we can
like
learn from that.
we had to build these, like on Mount Logan, we put up our tents, and then you had to build an ice wall to protect the tent from being ripped by wind. So then you build like this igloo wall around the tent, and then it would protect the tent. Like I'm like, oh my God, if I was 5 years old, I'd be in heaven. Like I literally was like, we're building snow forts as adults. Like how cool is this? Are you kidding me? I worked all my life so I could have money to go build a snow fort on a mountain. Like how did I miss this memo? But like, it's so fun to be a kid, and it's so fun to be curious and just playful and just, who cares? Like, this is reality. I'm at the bottom of Everest and the Milky Way goes across, and you sit there and you see the Milky Way like you've never seen it before. You buy the book early, you'll get the video clip that I share. It's part of the pre-order bonus. You see this clip go across and you realize like we are on a planet that is like circling a sun, that has a moon that moves the ocean, and you're worried about what? Like, come on, people. This is crazy. Like, just be silly.
Is that one of the questions I had was how perhaps those people that are struggling with finding their life's purpose, that are struggling with their summit, to your point, seek it, but those that can't find it for whatever reason, what advice or guidance would you offer someone who is on a journey to discover their own personal summit, wants to seek that summit? What advice would you give them?
I mean, you got to start doing some science experiments, right? Like 2019, I didn't know what my favorite color was. I got lost in my kids. I didn't know what, if you asked me to go out to dinner, I wouldn't tell you what I don't know. I'll eat chicken nuggets or leftover pizza. I mean, whatever's left on the kids' plates. And so I spent time like writing in a journal in different colored pens. I'm like, oh, red feels like I'm correcting myself. Like black feels too harsh. Blue feels too boring. Like it was funny. Like I would write with different colors, and you have to start asking questions, and you start realizing, oh, I don't like that because I don't like the texture. You have to slow down. You have to slow down and be like, do I like this? Do I like how it feels afterwards? Like French fries are awesome going in. They are not awesome 30 minutes later. I'm not doing that again, right? Like it's just taking the time to figure out who you are and what your preferences are, because that's kind of the magic of you, is being this unique person that has the different preferences, that likes banana bubblegum in strips, not in the cubes, because I don't like the big fat cubes. Like, who cares? I do, but it's something fun to kind of know.
So if your family, you mentioned your kids, I guess it strikes me that they've been a source of support, encouragement, inspiration, lots of great things. How have they influenced your outlook on life and your determination, if you like, to achieve the life that you're building for yourself?
Oh, they're my why, right? They're my everything. They remind me that life's supposed to be fun. The beauty of having 7 kids is that it is chaos. Like you can't even begin to manage it. So you don't, and you just play with it. And you just witness it. And you're like, this is life. Like someone just took a hoverboard through the living room. All right. I mean, I guess that's what we're doing, you know? And you just allow that. Like my house, I thought it was going to be this gorgeous, beautiful home that would be an architectural digest like my mother's. Mine is not. Mine has basketballs and all the things like everywhere. And I'm like, I'm in the season of raising children, and my house is their greenhouse. And so what makes it fun to have a cool childhood? And granted, you and I grew up with the movie Big, being like, all I want to do is that movie, right? So we're living that movie. And
I just wanted to be on that piano. I can't remember.
Yes.
I can't remember the store in the state.
And the trampoline inside.
Yes,
they had a trampoline inside. Yes.
Absolutely. What does success mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be financial, right? Because it's such an easy thing to measure. And I got to a limit that I thought I'd be like, feel successful. And I doubled that. And then I doubled that. I'm like, okay, well, this game isn't going to work. So this isn't really success. So now to me, it is, who have I impacted? Like, what have I made possible because I showed up today? Am I having fun? Is my light encouraging you to shine your light brighter, or for you to try harder, or for you to do yourself more? That's success to me. When I get a letter or a little message on Instagram or one of those things, and someone says, hey, I walked to the mailbox today, or hey, I walked around my kid's soccer practice instead of sitting in the car, and that's how I got my exercise in. Like, woohoo! I am a cheerleader. I love all those little things. And the tiniest thing of progress gets me so excited that it's so easy to be happy because I like little things.
I think it's back to what we were talking earlier as to the climb. I think what strikes me about, and the takeaway, so much we can learn, is there's a kind of an acknowledgement of what the summit is. So in the mountain scenario, you know the peak of the mountain, but the focus is the journey to get there. Right, it's every day, one step at a time. You celebrate each step. That's the important bit. That actually, ultimately, if you just focus on the process, the end goal becomes the outcome. That's fabulous. But then you move on. I think to your point, it's not that we shouldn't celebrate the big stuff. I mean, your achievements are phenomenal, but equally, it was part of the purpose behind Extrology, arguably, was that sense of, I think equally as incredible as someone who can't get off their couch today, to your point, who walks around the field at their kids' soccer practice tomorrow, that's achievement as much as, and not enough focus and attention goes to that. I think people just assume, well, if I can't climb a mountain, that's, why would I? I think we should sweat the small things more, I think, in terms of, or acknowledge the perceived small things more, because they're big things. Everything is is relative, I guess, to the people that are performing.
And we all have, like, one of the things in the book talks about waving your flag. And we all are waving our flag with everything we do. And we're impacting those around us because they see our flag. And our flag signifies to the world, here's where I am, here's what I need, here's how I can help. And when you wave that, then the universe gets to be a part of your story. And again, big mountains take big teams. And it's just so important. Like, we got to connect. Like, how else? Like, it's just magic. Like, life's literally magic. Here's what I've done. I'd love to share the story if it can help empower others. You saw the story. You're like, okay, let's do this. And now we get to have this conversation and we get to contemplate, like, ways to do life.
If you reflect back to your 21-year-old, I almost wanted to say sobbing self, which sounded incredibly disparaging.
No,
but
it's
I remember
fair.
the story.
It's fair.
So if you're sobbing on your way home from that first job, but if you reflect, if you could go back in time and give yourself some advice, that kind of wisdom and nugget, if you knew what you knew now, what advice would you give to 21-year-old Jenn Drummond?
Yeah. So younger me was serious. Like, I'm going to do this thing and this is how it's supposed to look. And I was like very like calculated. Like, finance was the perfect field because it was all numbers and no emotion and blah, 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 blah. I would go back to myself and be like, relax. You're going to be successful. Everything's going to happen. Just have fun. Like, go out there, be naughty, do something that you're not supposed to do. Eat the French fry. Just have fun. And that's what I tell myself. And so I know that about me. So I know I have to like continuously remind myself, am I having fun? Am I having fun? How could I have more fun right now? Okay, we're going to do that.
I think you make a really interesting. There is a sort of seriousness. This is projection now. I'm reflecting on my own 20s. I'm thinking I stopped playing and I became really serious because I'm an adult now and I'm on a path and I've got to achieve stuff.
Adulting.
We're adulting.
Yeah. Adulting.
And I look at now and I think, and sometimes I look at my own kids. They're at that age now. They're not kids, but they're in that age group. I look at them and the times they reflect on me and I can see them thinking, Dad, really, how old are you? Like, because they're adulting now. So I can see that playfulness, I think, is a big takeaway. So tell listeners, what are your dreams and aspirations for the future?
Yeah. I just want to meet more people and do more things and figure out where my limits are in different arenas and make mistakes. Like, I just want to make mistakes because then that means I'm living.
That's where the good stuff happens, right? In my experience, is we go through this period of life where we're terrified as to the prospect of making a mistake. But then you get to a point where you realize that's where we learn. That's how we grow. It's back to having fun, right? So is there a particular legacy that you hope to leave behind when we eventually step off this mortal coil? We will do one day. Is there a particular legacy you hope to leave behind?
Yeah, I want people to be Jenn lived. Like, Jenn chose to live. She chose to experience. She chose to try. She chose to test her edges. She chose to love. Like, again, I don't get to choose when I die. I get to choose how I live. And am I choosing to live in the moments that I'm living?
It's a very good point. Jenn, where should we be sending listeners to find out more? JennDrummond.com, I think, is the website. But let's we will share all this stuff in the show notes anyway, because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to know more, I know. But where should we be directing them?
Yeah, perfect. So go to JennDrummond.com. There you'll have a link to pre-order the book if you feel so inclined. And then you'll also have access to some of the different things we're doing. We're putting on challenges and fun things like that. Find my social media channels there. So wherever you play in the social world, you can connect with me and reach out, say hi, let me know what you're up to. I am such a super fan of humans and I get excited. So please.
And the book title one last time for listeners, remind us when what's it? Quit Proof: 7 Strategies to Build Resilience and Achieve Your Life Goals.
Yes. So it's available January 9, but order now because you get all kinds of fun stuff that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Fantastic. Jenn Drummond, it's been wonderful to have you as my guest this afternoon. It's been inspirational, insightful, and frankly, I've had a lot of fun, which sounds somewhat selfish, self-indulgent, but hey, I'm enjoying it. So thank you. It's been a privilege and huge inspiration to so many and a great role model. Really appreciate you taking the time out to come and share it with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.